Damon, how's it?
That's it.
Okay, and you?
Good, good. Right, it's been a while since we've gotten together. Um, Now, I just wanted to get straight into the show as soon as possible, and then Kevin will teach us afterwards, because we're not going to discuss with this limited time the different formats we can go through. But I'm going to just try going through a faster pace, but not f too fast, and yet a little bit less detail where you get the gist of what we covering and to make sure that everybody is happy. So I'm just going to share the screen. 1 second. Okay. So um, we on 6B1. We almost finished chapter 1 of Makkos. So after discussing the consequences of many witnesses being considered part of a single set, the Mishnah now defines a circumstance which separates witnesses to a crime in different sets. So we did tackle this before. If two witnesses observe him from one window, committing a crime for which the penalty is death, while two others observed him from another window, and an individual standing in between warned the perpetrator that the act he was about to commit was forbidden and punishable by death. So, as long as some of them saw each other. So, what does that actually mean? According to certain opinions, um, the witness from the one window, from the eastern window, would have to see one of the witnesses from the western window. And it could be a different witness from the western window seeing one of the witnesses in the eastern window. It doesn't have to be the same witness. As long as they can identify from either party, the Rashash says as long as it's one of the witnesses from a single window can see the other party. But most hold that one witness has to at least see another witness from each respective group. It doesn't have to be the same witness. Okay? Then, in that case, it binds them, and then they're considered one set of witnesses. But if not, they're considered two separate sets of witnesses. Therefore, since the observers who did not see each other are considered separate sets of witnesses, if you have a situation where one of them was found to be conspiring, or one of the sets, not part thereof, but the full set in the East Wing, for example, and one of them, well, then the accused of the crime, um, you have the defendant, and you have a separate set of witnesses that are considered to be valid because they're not discredited. What's going to happen then? The accused of the crime and the witnesses found to be conspiring are both executed. The reason why the second set is exempt from any punishment is because a set did not come to state that the Western Wing set were with them somewhere else in a location they have set to have witnessed the murder. So the accused is executed because there is still a solid set of witnesses which was not discredited and that testified that he committed the crime. The witnesses who were found to be conspiring are also put to death because it had been established that they testified falsely. So, what does that actually mean? Is that how is it that they could testify falsely if another set were not discredited? Well, it's quite simple. What we learned in the beginning of 5A is we said that, say, for example, you've got an arch criminal or mafia guy, and people are terrified of him, and he's committed a whole stray of homicides and assault and battery charges and loan sharking activities. And you have two witnesses that might owe this mafia boss money. They hear of a crime that's been committed, that there was in fact a murder that he did. And they haven't seen any witnesses come to the fore, so they're terrified of retribution. So they testify falsely they were there and they saw this mafia boss commit the murder. So if it turns out to be true, but there's a second set that said the Zomamim could not have witnessed it because they were with them in a different province. They cannot put somebody to death on the basis of them not actually witnessing the event. So whether or not it happened to be true is irrelevant. They are punished for conspiring to convict a defendant uh, of having committed a crime when they in fact did not witness it. Okay. Now we've also got to know this principle that about joining certain witnesses, that they cannot be executed if they were joined as one group. So, for example, in the West Wing, if a witness saw one of the witness sets in the East Wing and somebody in the East Wing saw one of the witnesses in the West Wing, in that case it would be enough to combine them. So even if some of them were made to be Adem Zomimim, or some of them were made to be ineligible because they were relatives, they had a certain bias, or perhaps they were gamblers and and they were sinners, and they you couldn't check that in fact they didn't have some vested interest in it on some level. Then, if a witness was discredited under that basis, the rest of the testimony is invalidated if they were joined as one group. So then the defendant wouldn't have died, and none of the Adem Zommerman would have died because as one group, as long as they weren't all convicted as being Adem Zommerman, there was no reciprocal death penalty, and neither would it have been enough to damage the defendant because all of their testimony would have been disregarded. Does that make sense? Pretty straightforward. So, um, the last bit to bear in mind is Rav Yossi has a particularly stringent rule. He said one can never be executed unless the two witnesses who testified against the accused were the very witnesses that participated in the warning. For it says, and he reads it literally, by the testimony of two witnesses. So Rav Yossi understands this verse to mean that every component of the testimony necessary to convict him, including the warning, must come from both witnesses. Okay? Since the criminal in our case had not been warned by these two witnesses, but by a third party, he can't be executed. Consequently, in our case, he hadn't been warned by those two witnesses, and uh, the witnesses are also, even if they're found to be Zommermen, they're not executed because if their testimony couldn't have convicted the accused, since they weren't part of the warning process, the defendant wouldn't have been executed either. And obviously, if they weren't there to witness the crime, they certainly couldn't have been there to provide witness against the defendant, even if they claim it was so. There's one more teaching that can be derived from the verse by the testimony of two witnesses. So when you're using the word testimony speech, the Sanhedrin can't listen through an interpreter. They must themselves understand what the witnesses are saying. Okay, let's quickly get on with the Gemara. So I'm going to share a verse that I scanned into Coral Draw, and it's going to make it a little bit clearer for you guys. Just give me 1 second. So the full verse it says in Devarim chapter 17, verse 6. Um, just do any of you guys want to read it? Guys,
Just choose someone.
go for it, Gav.
Okay. By the testimony of two, the full verse. By the testimony of two witnesses or three witnesses, the one who deserves to die shall be executed. He shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness.
Correct. Do you notice what would be perceived to be a repetition here? There's two repetitions. What would they be?
The three, if you got two, why would you need to mention three? Because two is sufficient. And the other one would be, and the one.
Excellent. So Gavin answered it. I just want to put it in a clearer way. We learned in the Mishnah in 5b, it could have said by the testimony of two or three witnesses. So the word witnesses is repetitive. And that came to teach us in the last Mishnah that all of them would have to be convicted as Adem Zomamim in order for the testimony, a reciprocal punishment to occur for their testimony. And we also found out that invalidation of any witnesses disqualifies the whole group because it could have sufficed just to say two or three witnesses. So that pluralization meant that it was either a solid group of witnesses or not. One person could dismantle the testimony of the others to set the defendant free, and they wouldn't get the reciprocal penalty, nor would it convict the defendant. So, Kevin, that was excellent. So, the word witnesses is a repetition, as you remembered. And then Gavin brought up a separate case. He shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. So, the Gemara is going to say exactly what Gavin says, and it says it as follows. It's not going to harbor in the word witnesses because it dealt with it last time. So, because the Mishnah has taught that groups of witnesses do not become one set unless they see each other, the Gemara says, listen, the same holds true for a single witness who does not see each other. It doesn't matter if you've got a few witnesses in the West Wing and a few witnesses in the East Wing. If you have one witness that cannot see another witness, they don't combine to form a set of witnesses. Okay? So Rav Zutra Bar Tovia said in the name of Rav, where do we know that the testimony of isolated witnesses is invalid? In other words, if they watch from a different window each, it doesn't have to even be a different wing of the building. Because this verse says exactly as Gavin said, by the testimony of two witnesses or three witnesses, the one who deserves to die shall be executed. So that says you need at least two. What is it mentioning? He shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. So the redundancy is exactly as Gavin said. If it says you need two witnesses, you can work out, or it says three, two or more is a valid group. Less than two, it's not valid. So why almost have repetition and have it a superfluous mentioning of one witness? And the Gemara said it's not a waste of time. It wasn't superfluous because you have to learn something from this term one witness. So what it says is that if you have a witness, in other words, an individual that saw an event in isolation, and another witness that saw the same event but in isolation from the other, and they couldn't see each other, their testimony is not sufficient to combine to form two witnesses, and therefore they can't put a person to death. So that wasn't redundancy. Do you see that, guys? Okay, good principle. All right. So nothing in the Torah is wasted, and we learn this in the Brisa as well. What does the Brisa say? He shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. So this obviously includes two witnesses who observe him committing an offense. And we said it said from this window and from that window. It doesn't even have to be a big distance, as long as their visual impairment is there that they couldn't see each other. Okay? And the Brisa corroborates that. The Brisa said the separate, it's seen as separate statements of a single witness. And then the Brisa says something strange, guys. It says, and not only this, but even of the two witnesses who viewed the crime one after another from the same window. In other words, they say, all right, let's take the fact that they're separated by a window and they can't see each other. Let's say they were exactly in the same place, but one came to see the beginning of an event, and one came to see the rest of the event, but they didn't see each other. So what would strike you as strange there, guys?
Just repeat that. Sorry, I was drinking something. Didn't hear you properly.
Okay, so if I say to you, listen, they're viewing it from just windows next door to each other in an apartment. They're not even on east wings of buildings in west, not even far. And we know you can't combine them to form a set of witnesses. So then the Brisa says not only this, but if one viewed it from exactly the same apartment window, and then another one came to view it, they don't combine to form a set of witnesses. So the Gemara is basically saying that it's a very strange statement, because the more obvious statement is, okay, they didn't see each other, they can't combine to form a single set of witnesses because of the pasuk saying two witnesses or three, but not one in isolation. But how could you think that if one witnessed the first part of the criminal act and the second witness viewed the second portion of the murderous act, that since they did not see the entire act, how could they possibly combine when each one saw half an act? And it's Gemara says, and you would, and not only that, this is the case. So the Gemara is saying, would you think it's even necessary for a Tana to teach that something that is so strange that they would combine to form one set of witnesses? Because if each one individually saw the full crime and can't be combined to convict the murderer, how can one that only saw the event partially, the beginning stages and the other one the end stages, that they could combine? What made you think they could combine? Do you get why the Gemara thinks it's strange that the Brisa says that's not the novelty? The novelty is that they can't combine. So, Kevya,
So in order to be just as simple, correct me if I'm wrong, in the most simple understanding, they have to be in the same location and view it from the same angle to be a set of witnesses. They can't be, even if they view it separately, that's considered they're like one witness, not two.
okay, so Kevin's bringing us a certain point. Kevin's saying, look, we understand that the witnesses never saw each other. It's not about the location. It's about the visualization. Because if you have witnesses in the West Wing and one of them sees one of the witnesses in the East Wing and one in the East Wing sees one of this different witness in the West Wing, even though they're in different locations, but they both can view the crime, they form one set of witnesses. Otherwise, they're seen as two
Okay.
separate sets. So it's not about location, it's about visualization. So then the Gemara thinks, okay, so now they're in exactly the same location, but the one views it in the beginning of the criminal act, and the other one views the remainder of the criminal act. In other words, neither one saw it in its entirety. Then maybe it's an issue of location. And the Gemara says, well, what do you mean an issue of location? It can't be, because the fact of it is location was never an issue when you had an East Wing and West Wing case in the Gemara. It was a case of could one of the witnesses at least see one from the other group, and they could see the crime effectively, and it was at a distance where you could actually see that. And the second thing of it is, how could you think that if one witness viewed the beginning of the act and the other witness viewed the remainder of the act, that they could combine their testimony, because neither one saw the act in entirety? So the Gemara says, yes, you may not think that necessarily in the case of a murder, because Abaye says to Rav Papa, that's fine in a murder case. You don't necessarily think that. But it's different in a case of cohabitation for one of the rules of sexual immorality, a sin that gets, like adultery or incest, etc., which gets the death penalty. Because in order to execute him for adultery, according to Abaye's reply to Rav Papa, it's not actually necessary for the witness to observe the entire act. But as long as he sees enough of it to make it clear that they engaged in conjugal act. Meaning, if each witness briefly observed a part of this forbidden act, in an adultery case, they can testify against a full crime. So the Brisa must therefore teach that nevertheless they do not combine to form the set of witnesses necessary to have him executed, since they did not witness the act simultaneously. So it seems as though the Gemara is making a distinction between a capital case, at which there has to be viewing the entire act, compared to an adultery case, where each one can view a act in its partiality. The Gemara, by the way, also goes further, guys, before we finish this last chapter. And, there's this term that there are a very stringent opinion that's almost like you're seeing take nail polish. For the Gemara uses clean language of the applicator going into the bottle. Okay? And therefore, only on that basis you can convict. Now, who's going to have an affair where you've got the paparazzi there with a camera, or two guys like say, yep, his penis entered into her vagina. We could see we only a nose apart. And don't worry about killing the romantic mood. We're close enough to view the act. How probable is that? That's very unlikely that if that is required, that you could get close enough to see such a thing, unless you've got almost video cameras in those days it didn't exist. But nobody would participate in an act that could cause them the death penalty whilst having witnesses that close. So many of the opinions do not go that stringent to say that you actually have to view it in that sort of stringency. And the reason why there is an opinion for that is because they don't want to kill people in an adultery case unless it was definitely witnessed, instead of a perceived witnessing of a conjugal act. The general opinion is, by the way, is that you have to see the whole act, but enough to realize that they're having an affair. But it doesn't mean that you actually have to see entry, genital entry. But you can know by what you see. You know what I'm saying? If it waddles like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. It is. So the thing of it is, the other opinion is that you can see the partial act, that the two witnesses in an adultery case can each see part of the conjugal act, because there's foreplay, there's the sexual act, etc. So foreplay isn't enough, but because you don't have to see the insertion, each party can get a very good idea that consummation has taken place, and therefore you don't have to sit there with binoculars watching it from start to finish with your popcorn and Coke Light. And it's enough that the two witnesses combine if they saw the beginning of the act and the end of the act. But it's not like that for a murder. Other opinions say that a person has to view the entire adultery act but not be close enough necessarily to have that sort of visualization. And the stringent opinion says that you need that sort of visualization. So the whole reason the buyer brings us to Rav Papa is that you have to, in a murder case, they don't combine to form one set of witnesses like they would in an adultery case, where they saw the first part of the act and the second, but neither one that was in exactly the same location witnessed it simultaneously. They don't combine in a murder case. So Rava says, if the witnesses saw the person giving the warning, and that can obviously occur in a murder case, or the person giving the warning saw them, they combine to form a set. So what do we mean? Is that if the sets did not see each other, but they recognized the person that was warning this murderer not to kill, that there would be a punishment and a consequence, and somebody from the other set saw the same witness. Now, I think in court, the only way this could work is they'd have to separate the sets of witnesses to see that there wasn't some sort of a conspiracy against the defendant. But if they could both corroborate the same person, or the witness can corroborate, the person giving the warning can corroborate they saw one of the witnesses from each group, that would be enough to combine the group of witnesses, even if the witness from each respective group didn't see a witness in the other respective group. Arthur's with us, hang on. Just hang on, what are you waiting for? Arth?
Yeah, I'm fine. By mistake, it disconnect audio instead of mute.
I know, it's wishful thinking. You just have to hold yourself tight for another few minutes. So, all I'm saying is, Arthur, another way that you can connect the set of witnesses, there are three ways we learned. The one, in each group, one witness has to see a witness from the other group. It doesn't have to be necessarily a corroboration of Alan sees Greg and Greg sees Alan. It can be a witness in West Wing sees one in East Wing, a separate witness in East Wing sees one in West Wing. That's one way. Another way that witnesses can be combined is within the utterance of the sentence, peace be upon you, my master, my teacher. And you say, how's that possible? You can say, it's not possible to get all the testimony in that time, but it is when you finish one witness and then you start a next witness. As long as that utterance didn't allow that sort of gap between the testimony of the preceding one finishing before the next one started, that's another way to combine them. And the third way is if the actual warning person, who happened to, I suppose, be a witness to the crime, could corroborate the witness in an east and west wing, or they could corroborate who the person was giving the warning. That would combine the witnesses by a third party. Okay, that's all we have to learn. So the Gemara delineates those people whose warning is acceptable. Rav is making another statement now. He said the one giving the warning of whom they spoke may even be the victim himself and even a demon. Now, they don't mean initially a demon. By the way, Rabbi Goldstock's wife used to call me demon for years because she was an Israeli. She didn't know my name was Damon while I was there for Shabbos. So even I could have given the warning. No, but when they use this term in the Gemara, it could have been the victim himself, because the victim is screaming, "Don't kill me, don't hurt me." That's a valid warning. The other valid warning is when they use the term a demon. It means you can't discern where the voice is coming from, but you can hear it. That does suffice, because what is a warning meant to be, according to Rava, and according to many opinions, is to break somebody out of that state of shock when they're going on autopilot and they're not thinking clearly. According to also other opinions, it's to inform somebody that is not educated that a particular act is prohibited. Not only is it prohibited, but it also has a consequence. So in other words, consequence can jar somebody out of committing the act, but also not that it has to be that it's prohibited and a consequence. Why? Because then the person is forewarned. We know of a case we're learning, Gavin was learning last night from Schottenstein, however, that there are certain cases where there's an inadvertent killing, but you think that killing this person is a permitted act. A person could be, for whatever reason, you think you're in the right, and you kill the wrong person, or you're meaning to kill an animal and then you kill a human, or whatever the case may be. So a warning in terms of what is prohibited and where it's prohibited, and the consequence also forms part of the point of the warning. Okay. So the warning necessary to convict the offender needn't come from the witnesses, but is acceptable from any source. And we learned that Rav Yossi says, no, it has to come from the two official witnesses. They have to be the warners in the case, and it can't come from any source. Okay, let's just see how long we've got. We've got time. I'm flying through it. So now the Gemara returns to this case now of isolated witnesses. And Rav Nachman said the testimony of isolated witnesses is effective in monetary cases, even though these require the testimony of two witnesses. How do you know? Because remember when I shared that in Coral Draw, that statement, it says, he shall be executed by the testimony, he shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. You remember we read that, guys? I shared the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, just so when I use the term, he shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness, what is that related to? A capital case. So in a capital case, the testimony of one witness does not suffice. But there's no reason that you cannot, according to Rav Nachman, have isolated witnesses for a monetary case. Now, let me just find something for you. One witness, even in a monetary case, is not sufficient. You need two witnesses. But what we are talking about here is isolation of witnesses. In other words, if you're at Norwood Mall and two people that don't see each other see a BMW bang a Ford, and they don't see each other, they can testify and combine to form a set of witnesses in a monetary case. By the way, even if you have a single witness and not isolated two single witnesses, it's enough to get a shavua, an oath, from the monetary case to prove that a person hasn't stolen or damaged his fellow. So one is even enough to trigger shavua, where the defendant's, because it's his word against the other. But certainly two isolated witnesses can work together to combine in a monetary case. from Rav Nachman. So what's the big question? So Rav Nachman said that, there is a particular issue, and I'll tell you what it is. If it's effective in a monetary case, this is what Rav Zuta's challenge is. He said, look, it should also serve to save the defendant in a capital case. So he says, I see that in Devarim chapter 17, verse 6, it says he shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. When we say one witness, we mean two isolated single witnesses. So for an execution we get it. But what happens if you can save a person on death row by combining witnesses? If we learn that you can combine witnesses in a monetary case, then surely in a capital case, when we do all that's possible to spare the defendant, they should be able to combine isolated witnesses. We understand why you can combine isolated witnesses to convict, but why not for a case of defense? Because we've learned in our Mishnah that if two witnesses saw from one window and two witnesses from another window, but without seeing each other, and one group was found to be a conspiring witness, for example, the offender and they are actually executed because the two groups don't combine. So Rav Zutra is saying, listen, I have a problem with the Mishnah, because why don't you just combine the sets if it's going to create a defense to protect the accused? Not in a case to convict, but when it's going south for the accused, at that point, why can't you combine it by having maybe a testimony one after the other? In other words, use it as a defense strategy, but not an accusationary conviction strategy. And the Gemara answers and said, listen, this is actually a difficulty. It doesn't mean that the halacha doesn't go with Rav Nachman. It does. But we are saying as Rav Zutra does have a point, and we can't answer that point. All right, we've got 6 minutes left. I'm happy to end off on this note. Kevin, teach us, and we can call it quits.
Okay, so two quick ideas today. Firstly, today is Yom Yerushalayim. Yom Yerushalayim, and it's some people regard it as a miraculous day. I'll tell you, let me just get my notes. I don't remember everything off pat here. One sec. What's going on here? Where are my notes? Hold on. Oh, there we go. Hold on a sec. Ah, there we go. So it's considered a national holiday, and the Israel reclaimed the control over the old city in June 67 during the Six-Day War, and today's the 28th day of Iyar. And so with that recapturing, we got access to the holy sites, and some people don't say Hallel today. It's regarded as a spiritual, even though it's not a Chag, or it's not like a religious day. Some people say, like Yom Ha'atzmaut was miraculous. So some people do not say Tachanun, and today also a lot of shuls Kehilot don't say Tachanun on this day because it was a miracle. It was part of the reconquering of Yerushalayim. And another idea from the upcoming Parshiot in Parshat Bamidbar, it says regarding dishonesty and specifically with theft from vulnerable people such as converts, widows, etc. If it said in the commentary in the Chumash that I read the other day that if someone steals or embezzles money from vulnerable people and takes advantage, they're actually taking advantage of Hashem himself, because he looks after them. So it's actually an affront to him. I don't want to use the word personally. So that's how serious it is. And it mentions many times, but to be ultra sensitive to the widow, the convert, and these type of people.
Okay, just one quick question, guys. Going forward, I've got a couple of ideas. I gave a lot less detail this time, and we seem to move faster, and I can give even less detail going forward. I want to try that pacing because Lance said that on the repetition and revision we did, that even on what we've already done last time when we did a Daf Yomi pace, he didn't find it so pleasant, and that's on repetition. So new stuff, it probably is very unpleasant. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to maybe add less commentary, as you saw from tonight. We covered a lot more ground, uh, and we still did have a little bit of detail, but then we might get to a point where we lessen and lessen and lessen the detail to have more coverage. That's one way to do it until there's not enough detail where you don't have a full picture. So we can get to that happy medium. That's one way to do it. The other way that we could do it is, look, we're going to finish this first chapter of Makkot, is we actually do things in a much more of a broad base, which we can discuss a couple of strategies. Like, for example, one could do uh, um, almost what gets covered in each respective chapter, and then in the beginning of the book, do a full daf, not daf, sorry, a full Mishnah with the dafs associated. So sometimes it could be two dafs, sometimes it's six on that first Mishnah. So you get a sense of each book, and then I'll go through what each chapter covers, and that could basically take a year or two to cover the whole of Shas, but you'll have a very good understanding in terms of the setting out of what the issues are with the one mission and all the few duffs associated with it and what occurs in each chapter, just to get a holistic broad base. These are just different things to think about. I'm happy to do whatever the group wants. I'm just sharing ideas.
You have
You
my vote.
explained very well
And I thought the
tonight.
pace today was actually very good. How
Yeah.
many ducks could you cover at the pace you went today? How long would it take to cover a duck? A week?
Um, with this, I think we can track it at the end of the week. I think it should take like it used to take six sessions. We only do four a week. It always took 6.13 sessions. So we can
You
do
know, if we're doing a high level overview, I think it makes sense to do it around about this pace, like a duff a week, because you really want to get to it. You don't want to go too quickly, and you also want to cover a little bit of detail, not too much, because we're not, we're not that great at remembering, but a little bit, so that we at least understand each book, each Masechta, because we're only spending. You say it's a couple of how many duffs is a Masechta roughly?
No. So I wasn't saying Dafs Masechta. I said another way to do it was to do a
No, I mean, how many duffs is the opening Mishnah? How many duffs is that? Sorry, that's what I meant.
It depends on the book. It could be four, it could be six, it could be three. But it gives you a sense of the whole book. And then we go through chapter by chapter, just some of the concepts in each Mishnah and some of the issues at play. And I mean that can
It
give
will
a
take
broad
us 3 to
perspective.
6 weeks to finish a book, which is great.
It could take
That's
a
on.
month, but I don't know if that would suit Lance. Lance wanted a particular structure. We can discuss it as a group that would work for both parties, and we'll make a compromise. You know, the compromise is where everybody's miserable. No, I'm kidding, kidding. We'll do a thing where everybody's happy. But all I'm saying is I'm flexible